Number one Ibble Dibble here. Hello, friends. Today I want to talk about the UK Society Snub of the Year, Westminster versus Sussex. Time will tell, but it's very likely the high society wedding of the decade will be the 7th Duke of Westminster and Miss Olivia Henson on June 7th at Chester Cathedral. And of course, it's come out in the wash that Polo and Lolo are not invited. Now, one thing I have always found absolutely captivating about Dumb and Dumber's DIY PR strategy is that they feel they must let the world know every time they are not going somewhere. When it's a royal event, they typically try to create as much will they or won't they buzz around it as possible, RSVPing late enough to not just inconvenience but insult their hosts. Prince Philip's funeral and King Charles's coronation are great examples of this. They played will they or won't they in the press so long people wondered if there would even be seats saved for them. And in the end, only Harry showed up, literally sniffing and sneering and growling like some sort of angry beast. When it's a non-royal event, they will usually say they turned it down, even though they were very likely not invited in the first place. For example, every single year since they moved to the US, we've been reading articles about how they prefer their low-key family time to the Oscars or the Met Ball, though the events they do show up for indicate this living legend of aviation and woman of vision will attend the opening of an envelope. The strategy is so intriguing to me because it has always backfired and is guaranteed to backfire in future. When it comes to attending royal events, though they may get the maximum amount of attention, portraying themselves as self-sacrificing victims of family and duty in the press, it's never a good look when they actually show up. They're consistently, visibly horrified at being seated in the second or third row. They literally got booed at the Platinum Jubilee. And Meghan's weird attempts at creating picture-perfect moments, like shushing the children on the balcony when obviously no one can fucking hear them, are dissected and mocked for weeks afterward. They attend to maintain their now very tenuous connection to and status as royals, but their behavior shows them up in dispiriting contrast to not just the current working royals, but minor royals, almost any aristo in attendance, and even hangers-on, who all have more dignity in bearing, if not in title. When it comes to non-royal events, the unflattering trend holds. Every time they're in the press for pretending to turn down an invite so they can go on a picnic with Archie's preschool or some such nonsense, we're reminded they are not popular or connected enough to be Hollywood insiders or even fake it till they make it as Hollywood insiders. And they're sinking lower and lower beneath that strata, not floating up towards it slowly through hard work. It's better to just not say anything at all if you're not invited to an event in any given year. It will pass, and your project next year or the year after next or in 8 years or in 15 years will redeem you if you keep at it and you get lucky. Do you think Kim Kardashian would ever have been invited to the Met Gala if she issued a bitter statement of denial every year she wasn't invited? Michelle Yeoh was Miss Malaysia 1983. She finally won in 2023. Do you think she would have ever won an Oscar if she had publicly bitched about not being nominated and not being invited, or pretended the Oscars were not that important, or pretended she had something better to do every year for 40 years? Harry and Meghan keep telling Hollywood they're better than all of them because they're royal. They don't need work because they're rich. They don't need approbation because they're privacy oriented. They don't need to attend the glitziest, highest stake networking events because they consider their 3-year-old's Easter egg hunt more exciting. They're constantly reminding everyone around them that associating with them is beneath their station and therefore a favor only grudgingly performed at their convenience is insulting. And the insult is doubtless more keenly felt by self-made millionaires and Nepo babies than by the Joe Schmoes they in turn treat like trash. Then they're surprised when Hollywood takes them at their word and doesn't bother with them. Idiots. Less publicized than their royal redundancy and Hollywood humiliations is the pan away and fade to black they've experienced in high society. To be clear, I'm talking about British high society. They never made it into American high society. Truth be told, they never even tried. I think because Harry believes the New York social circuit and season is beneath him, if he's ever thought of it at all, and Meghan is too cheap to buy her way into anyone's good graces, and thinks she's too famous to run around with a little set that does natural history, Dance with the Dancers, etc. In her mind, she lived at Kensington Palace. Nikki Hilton just rented it out for her wedding. Harry's so confused about who's who, he's posing with Prince Mario Max. They're both such snobs they don't even know where Rome is, forget doing as the Romans do. And in their total arrogance, they failed to realize they needed to build that new social network because they were no longer royal. They had no idea what they were doing in Hollywood, and Harry's old set was closing ranks. Many upper-class Brits turned the page on them after the Oprah interview. True or not, they were choosing the winning side, and the royals are always the winning side. And with every new attack on the royals, it became clear not only that Harry would never get on side, not only that he was fanciful and despicable, but that he is disloyal and indeed dangerous to know. And H&M have stupidly been their own executioners in this social demise by 1,000 cuts with their crazy fake security concerns. They have claimed repeatedly that simply being in the UK is so dangerous for them and their children, they will not risk the bodily harm. That certainly makes it easy for anyone wishing to exclude them. No excuse or explanation required. Now that it's clear there will be absolutely no consequences from Charles, William, even the York sisters for leaving Harry out, and hosts can tell Harry with a straight face that they only wished to preserve his safety and respect his preference. H&M get no invitations at all. It's all especially fun because they were such asses about the invitations to their own evening reception. Meghan's enough of a brown noser to comprehend this rejection for what it is. She just doesn't care. With Harry, the cognitive dissonance is deafening. And that's what makes him so fun to watch. For the first time in his life, he's ditched, bailed, pulled on his golden parachute, and it's not opening. Everyone who is anyone in British society will be at this wedding. Every other duke will be invited to this wedding. Once upon a time, Harry got invited to everything. It was really required to invite him. Now that he's fallen so far, the Duke of Westminster is probably the only person with enough clout to invite Harry despite the royal family feud. And the fact that he's chosen not to and proclaimed it so publicly does not reflect well on Harry as a person and as a friend. The snub indicates that Harry is now fully shut out of the world he relied on for his identity and livelihood, and he simply doesn't have the goodwill or credibility in any other sphere to paint it any other way. What makes the Duke so special? Why does this wedding matter so much? What's the backstory here? Obviously, they're entwined, but I'll try to describe 3 important elements here: economic, social, and familial. The Westminsters own more land than the Crown and were the richest people in the UK for almost 300 years, all the way up until the year 2000-ish, when inventor entrepreneurs like James Dyson, Jim Ratcliffe, and Andrew Curry, the Hindujas, Michael Platt, Denise Coates, Richard Branson ever so briefly, et alia, entered the fray. They made their money in property development. According to their family website, they've been in the biz for 300 340 years, and the bulk of their wealth came from developing Mayfair, Belgravia, and Pimlico. The key to their success in these neighborhoods is never selling. You cannot buy a house in Grosvenor Square, for example. What you can buy is a leasehold that will eventually revert use to whichever duke is around when the lease expires. What that entails is both an extremely high initial fee for the leasehold, plus ground rent, service charges, contributions to a sinking fund, lease transfer fees, lease extension fees, and of course the cost of arbitration should you dispute any of these charges. Zero tenant protections were enacted until the late 1960s. Traditionally, a residential lease was for 99 years, extendable in negotiable increments, depending on circumstances. Though I've also heard of properties with initial leases that were for 125 or 199 years. And they'll do one-off deals with residential real estate developers for 250-year leaseholds, even 999-year leaseholds for commercial and retail developers outside of London. They consider a short-term lease any leasehold with between 2 and 65 years remaining, so less than a human lifetime. And obviously, it depends on the property, but a small mews house with maybe a decade left on the lease might go for £4 million. A luxury flat at a double prime address, £9 million, while a new development, super luxury triplex penthouse type thing or mansion could go for 150 million. One of the grand houses, sort of mini palaces, especially with a fresh leasehold, 300 million plus. London attracts more billionaires from more countries than other top tier cities like New York and Paris for legal and cultural reasons. So there's actually more competition and higher relative prices for the most expensive properties rather than the entry level or mid range luxury properties, stuff that's less than 10 million. That said, you'd be lucky to get a leasehold. As a rule, since the 80s, they've been letting out more and more properties that return to them as short-term rentals. This accomplishes two things. Number one, it drives up the prices of the long-term leaseholds exponentially. Number two, it allows them to immediately profit from skyrocketing London rental rates. Obviously, it all depends a little bit on the street, the building, the apartment itself, but a Grosvenor one bedroom in Mayfair or Belgravia will run about £800 per week, a two bedroom 1500-ish. I'm not sure about retail and commercial leases, but my understanding is that for spaces that come up, they now offer 20-year leases. These days, the Grosvenors also have international partners in various property concerns, structured in different ways depending on the country, all throughout the world, even in really tough spots like mainland China. In the US, they most notably own a huge chunk of Silicon Valley. According to their website, they own property in 43 cities, with 9 billion's worth owned outright and an additional 11 billion's worth managed by partners abroad. Of course, that is only property. They also have umpteen non-property business investments in finance, tech, industry, etc., primarily related to food and ag tech. Grosvenor Pear always styled himself the reticent Romanov of the British aristocracy, a gentleman farmer called to service, and therefore they invest in piles of companies promising great outcomes in terms of human health and environmental sustainability. Of course, it can be very easily argued that anything they've done in this arena is easily outweighed by their continued provision of fossil fuel energy in their properties and recent dalliance in the production of consumerist hellscapes like the Liverpool One, but I digress. In other words, all the articles proclaiming Huey Britain's most eligible bachelor worth $9.5 billion when he inherited his dukedom at 25 actually understated his enormous wealth. The other key to their ever-growing fortune reason has, of course, been tax avoidance. In the 1950s, they had to sell off 66 acres in Pimlico to cover death duties and realized they would have to restructure everything to survive. At that time, almost all of their assets were put into trust, with inheritors made the beneficial owners of various companies in different proportions. Rumor has it that though Huey owns everything in name, the way things are actually structured, he cannot control much, though of course he's a member of the board and will work his way up and through the various companies over his lifetime, as per his level of interest. In terms of the day-to-day, he still lives where he grew up, the family seat, Eaton Hall, with his mother and his fiancée, and the way his father structured things before he passed. Huey gets the same amount of cash every year as his three sisters, and his mom gets a bit more. It's all set up so he literally couldn't blow it if he wanted to, quite like the Crown Estates. And he apparently works 4 days a week, 9 to 5, at one of the Grosvenor subsidiaries, and 1 day a week at the Westminster Foundation. On a personal level, he is not the typical toff. He went to his local primary school, did not attend Eton, Harrow, Oxford, Cambridge. He has a bachelor's in countryside management from Newcastle University. Apparently, he will always throw his card down for the first and last round of drinks, but he's not an essentially flashy person, so hardly a backgrid affiliate marketer like some other dukes. I think this really comes through in his engagement photo. He's borderline. His bride-to-be, in my opinion, just takes it too far. The hair and the belly and the clothes, she looks like she just woke up. And you'll note, no ring. Very weird crop on this photo, and we don't get to see Olivia's ring. Very, very different vibes from H&M. Obviously, with all this money, and especially with existing interests in Silicon Valley and an estate management company, the Westminsters could be valuable business partners and advisors for H&M. They even have a bit of a TV production connection. Huey's sister Edwina is married to Dan Snow, the history presenter who owns the History Hit YouTube channel. He's been trying to expand with a lot of UK history content, much of it with a royal or military focus. This kind of content is what H&M should have made. Yes, they'd still be profiting off of their royal name and access, but at least they would provide inquiring Brits with educational value and perhaps even some insider perspective. Back in the 80s and 90s, this is what Prince Edward did before becoming a full-time working royal in 2002, and it's obviously much more appropriate in terms of preserving the royal legacy and personal family relationships. They might not have made as much money as quickly this way, but they could have gotten their foot in the door, picked up valuable experience, given their family and the British public time to adjust to a new norm, demonstrated that they didn't despise all elements of the UK media, only the worst elements. If all they wanted was to make money by living in the public eye, they could have done so without relinquishing their membership in the club, if you will. But that wasn't what they wanted, was it? It seems like they wanted to not just sabotage the monarchy as an institution, but hurt and harm specific family members as much as they could. Next, what of social currency? Obviously, in the UK, money is paramount, but it's not everything. The Westminster dukedom is the most recently created non-royal dukedom, but that's not to say that they're anything approaching new money. The family was first ennobled in 1622 as baronets, created barons 140 years later, and a mere 25 years later, pumped all the way up to earls by George III. They were bestowed the title Marquess at the coronation of William IV in 1830, and Queen Victoria raised her bestie in 1874 to a duke. Gerald, the sixth Duke, Huey's father, was an OBE, a Knight of the Garter, a Companion of the Order of Bath, and a Commander of the Royal Victorian Order. Huey was chosen to be part of the coronation procession as the bearer of the Royal Standard of England. So they're really the top of the pops in terms of money and status. I may never live to see the day, but I would put my money on Hughie's daughter, if he has one, marrying either Prince George or Prince Louis, because their families are so very close, but they are not very related as far as the British aristocracy goes. Hughie's mother is a descendant of George II. That's the closest familial relationship. And Charles and Gerald, the sixth Duke, were lifelong friends, having somewhat similar personalities. Sensitive, a little bit silly, bullied at school in their younger years, politically progressive for their class, and very serious about philanthropy and the missions of their foundations as they aged. Their wives were also quite similar. Beyond being the very tall, blonde, horsey counterparts to their less glamorous husbands, Diana and Natalia were both nice girls. What is a nice girl? To start with, a girl from a good family. In other words, an aristocratic family, guaranteeing they were brought up with the same conventions, accepted the same norms, and held the same expectations, but perhaps more importantly, very young. Diana was just 20 when she married Charles and became the Princess of Wales, and Natalia was 19 when she married Gerald Grosvenor and a few months later became the Duchess of Westminster. They were considered innocent, adaptable, easily trained and guided into their roles, especially given their upbringing. As expected, they both started having children rather early as well. Natalia was 20 when Lady Tamara was born, while Diana was 21 when William was born. Natalia was only 2 years older than Diana, and Charles only 3 years older than Gerald, so it makes sense that given everything they had in common and being in the very small social circle at the pinnacle of UK society, they would become close friends. At first, when Hugh, the current Duke, was chosen to be one of Prince George's godparents, aged just 24, I thought it seemed young, but it makes sense in context. Princess Diana was only 20 when she became Lady Edwina's godmother, and Natalia was only 23 when she became Prince William's godmother. When Prince Harry was born, neither of the Grosvenors were asked to be his godparents, but when Hughie was born, King Charles was made one of his godfathers. I always found it a bit odd that, lacking the same reciprocity, if you will, Harry asked Hughie to be one of Archie's godfathers. I also found it a little bit off because royals don't share the same godparents. Perhaps one child will have one half of a couple as a godmother, and their sibling will have another half of a couple as their godfather, but generally speaking, they don't get repeat godparents. The reverse is not true. King Charles is godfather to pairs of siblings, for example. But at the time, I admit I wondered if Harry wasn't just competing with his brother and they didn't just choose Hughie because he was super rich. I also find it weird that they did not publicly identify Archie's godparents, given that not only is revealing the names royal tradition, but the names of godparents are a matter of public record in the Church of England. In theory, all one must do is walk into the church and ask. But at the time, they made such a big deal of this being a tradition-breaking measure to protect the privacy of private citizen not going to be royal Archie. Of course, in hindsight, I easily recognize this as one of their first pity plays slash power plays. It's not as weird as there being no doctor's signatures on Archie's birth announcement. I'm sure whatever Archie's lineage or parentage or birth of the body or otherwise, the Duke was happy to be his godfather. I know there are a lot of conspiracy theories about Archie's birth. I personally think Meghan did physically birth him because of how her face and body looked. I think this no doctor signatures, no publicized godparents thing was an attempt to brand themselves as a terribly private couple, terribly concerned about the privacy of their children, unfairly and unkindly exploited by the firm and the press when they knew they were going to Megxit, but the rest of us didn't know yet. And it just ended up backfiring on them because people perceived it as extremely sketchy in ways they did not predict. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I also think it's really unfair that Archie got a set of at least 4 very reliable high society British godparents and Lily got Tyler Perry. When she's trying to appeal to the commoners, Megan talks about her children's heritage and the important role they'll have as they grow. When she's feeling entitled and nasty, she'll rage about their birthright and what they're entitled to as royals. So to guide little Princess Lily through all that, she chose this guy.
Does this mean we got to go over there and do all of that in the church with them and figure all that out? Because I don't want to do that.
I think that clearly indicated bridges were burnt way before the Netflix special came out, and I wonder if Westminster Bridge wasn't one of them. In my previous video, I spoke about the refusal of narcissists to acknowledge any boundary between public and private life. If the fact wasn't demonstrated clearly enough by Hughie literally serving as the literal bearer of the literal royal standard of England, the Grosvenors don't go in for this. They have definitely been caught in some very unflattering scandals. The 6th Duke, for example, was known to consort with prostitutes regularly and was caught out doing so more than once. And then, of course, there's the landlord stuff, trying to evict poor families and disabled tenants to convert council flats into luxury apartments, getting sued by tenants accusing Grosvenor of illegally Airbnb-ing neighboring properties, etc. Perhaps because of the extra scrutiny they endure when it comes to etiquette and protocol, they're on top of it. And in the UK, the hierarchy makes it simple. You go with the rules and preferences of the highest ranking royal present. This has created a little family wedding drama with the royals in the past. When Hughie's sister, Lady Tamara, got married in 2004, Charles and Camilla weren't yet engaged. Obviously, the 6th Duke did not judge Charles's adultery on any sort of personal level. That would be ridiculous and hypocritical. But he had invited the whole royal family and everyone had confirmed their attendance. The Queen, Prince Philip, Charles, William, and Harry. Charles asked if he could bring Camilla. The Duke said yes, but they must enter separately and sit separately. Charles pushed back and the Duke compromised, saying, okay, they could sit together, but they must not enter together because there is an order in which nobility enters a room and are seated for an event. And though he would personally accept Camilla entering alongside Charles, he couldn't disrespect the Queen by allowing it in her presence, not to mention the insensitivity to William and Harry. Though Charles and Gerald made up later, and obviously Charles and Camilla married soon after, Camilla and Charles were so enraged by the Duke putting his foot down that they skipped the wedding. Camilla specifically was reported as being absolutely incensed, and in retrospect, it seems this may have been the moment when she gave Charles the ultimatum that he had to marry her so this didn't happen again. Diana had been gone for over 8 years. Both William and Harry were over 20 years old. She didn't want to skulk around like some embarrassing side piece anymore, especially when it was all such a charade for his mother and the newspapers, really. Everyone in their circles already treated them as a long-standing couple in private. We know all this because it was initially leaked by the same messy personal assistant slash spokesperson Camilla had, who later got fired for leaking one of Camilla's conversations with William. And the Queen herself got involved at the time, having a Buckingham Palace courtier tell the press, quote, "It may provoke comment on the day, but Her Majesty will also be attending, and she is a stickler for protocol. A pew will be set aside for the members of the royal family attending, and it would be inappropriate for Mrs. Parker Bowles to sit beside Prince Charles, since she has no official standing. Even for Mrs. Parker Bowles to arrive with the prince at the event in the presence of the Queen would be to confer rights and status upon her that she simply does not have, end quote. Regarding the Duke's wedding, as has unfortunately become the norm with H&M, there have been multiple mixed reports. Interestingly, the snub was debuted almost immediately following the wedding announcement in the Sunday Times by a quote-unquote friend of William and Harry's, who sure sounds a lot like the Duke himself. Quote, "It's incredibly sad it has come to this. Hugh is one of very few close friends of William and Harry's who has maintained strong bonds and a line of communication with both. He wishes they could put their heads together and patch things up, but realizes it's unlikely to happen before the wedding. He wants to avoid anything overshadowing the day, especially for Olivia, and doesn't want any awkwardness. Otherwise, we are not in a position to comment on the guest list." End quote. That's
rural Cheshire.
right. On second thought, maybe that wasn't the Duke himself. Maybe that was his mother. She knows what's up. I could see an old friend like the Duke not extending the invitation, calling Harry and politely explaining why, catching up a bit, assuring him there was no bad blood, and leaving it there. But his mother would be smart enough to have noticed H&M's super disrespectful will they or won't they press releases, pretending everyone in London is waiting with bated breath for their belated RSVP, and decided to have none of that in the papers leading up to her son's wedding. I bet she's got a little Huey scrapbook she's been keeping for 30 years, and she's not about to let these nasties ruin his clippings. There's been a bit of a debate over the Duke's timing of this announcement. Was it to help the royal family bounce back from the royal racist accusations being bandied about with the release of Endgame? There are two parts to this. Hugh and Olivia got engaged in April 2023 and only announced in early December 2023. But that in and of itself is not evidentiary of any strategic timing around the announcement. The norm for big high society weddings is to announce around 5 or 6 months prior to the day. Once the date is set, the venue is set, and enough of the big pieces are underway that you know nothing will go so wrong as to change that. Also, given how many royal and high-profile figures the family will want to attend, it doubtless would take some extra time to run a date by Charles and William and settle something, given their calendars are planned out, sometimes even 2 years in advance. Literally everyone else, including the Bishop of Chester, is going to change whatever plans they had, whatever they may have had booked at the cathedral to accommodate the Duke. Specifically naming and excluding Harry in the press a mere 48 hours after the engagement announcement, however, is very bold, very irregular. I don't believe this was done in cahoots with the royals. I think this comes straight from the soon-to-be Dowager Duchess, and the royals just didn't mind and certainly didn't respond because Harry is indefensible. I second Tom Bower on that point. Here are my favorite lines from his blistering op-ed in the Daily Mail. Quote, "It is understandable if a preeminent member of the British establishment did not want to risk embarrassing the royal family by turning the event into the inevitable circus that tends to accompany Harry and Meghan wherever they go. Though undoubtedly wounded, Harry can hardly be surprised. On his brief recent trips to Britain, he has invariably been shunned by his old friends. None openly support Harry, and privately they must despair of his recklessness. Grosvenor did not need to be told by William it's him or us. Surely that message was tacitly understood. Omid Scobie's ridiculous book, filled with hurtful slurs, offered the Sussexes the chance to distance themselves from this pestilent writer, but they have not issued any official rebuttal against the accepted view that Scobie is their mouthpiece. Any chance of reconciliation between the royal family and the Sussexes is now fanciful, and Grosvenor's omission of Harry and Meghan from his wedding guest list is tantamount to the British establishment finally shutting the door on Harry and Meghan." End quote. I love this because it not only confirms my suspicions about Prince Harry finally getting what he deserves in terms of social ostracization, but because it's also a masterful takedown of Scobie as a competing royal biographer. He's a puppet and a mudslinger. He is not a journalist. Of course, H&M had to clap back fast when they would have looked better if they just kept their mouths shut. Just days later, all the usual media outlets were flooded with the correction via a Sussex source that, quote, Harry actually got a save the date card a few months ago, but called Hugh and said it would be too awkward if he and Meghan attended, so he made his apologies and Hugh understood, end quote. I don't believe that for a minute, do you? A save the date card? An Evite would be more believable. I think it's possible in the couple days after he proposed and she said yes, they sent out an email or a private Instagram post or a group text to their private friends group, you know, a list that Harry may have been on. It probably said something like, we're thinking late May, early June 2024. That is not an invitation. It's not really a save the date. Everyone knows plenty of friendly acquaintances get cut for weddings. Again, I think it's possible or even likely that Hughie called Harry at some point to let him down easy and offer his explanation or apologies, such as they are. And I'm sure Harry said he understood because what else can you say? I think H&M's pride was hurt. So they needed to make it sound like they were the ones that dumped him, not the other way around. And I just don't believe that. In addition to nipping any speculation in the bud, I also think it was very important for the Westminsters to let all their prospective guests know that they need not worry about the reputational and privacy threats that Harry and Meghan are. I think that's at least as important to them as showing whose side they're on, which is already assumed. Firstly, we know Meghan's favorite thing in life is to get photographed strolling into a high society event wearing $250,000 of couture and jewels. She literally hangs back and walks slowly behind Harry to prolong the experience. It's the only time she doesn't push in front of him. She's been invited to 0 society parties in over 2 years. If she was invited to this wedding, she would absolutely attend. For her, Will and Kate being there would be a good thing, not a bad thing. She loves drama and would embrace the opportunity to try to show up Kate and or pretend she was victimized somehow by the Prince and Princess of Wales. I could even see Meghan showily, icily ignoring Will and Kate and the rest of the guests, while Harry ran around half apologizing to everyone like a weasel until he gave up and started scowling and drinking and she dragged him out. Isn't that what happened at the Inskip wedding? Or maybe she would call the pops on herself even though the family had specified no outside photographers. Isn't that what she did at Celia McCorkadale's wedding? Or maybe she would announce the imminent arrival of the 3rd Sussex moon bump. Isn't that what she did at Eugenie's wedding? Maybe she would guilt and harass them through the press into inviting her to the evening reception and then turn around and snub them. Isn't that what she did at Pippa Middleton's wedding? It really makes me wonder what kind of dirt Misha Nunu has on her that Meghan didn't try it at her wedding. Harry knows after attending Hughie's 21st that there will be no cell phones and no outsiders at this party. I think Meghan would love some pop shots of her leaving the cathedral or the reception early in tears because Kate and Will and Charles and the whole social set and the whole UK media and the whole UK, in fact, were such mean racist bullies to her. She really has this weeping Madonna complex she must have picked up in her fake feminist Catholic girls' school that she hasn't had a chance to perform for quite a while now. I think she's sick of pretending to be happy at the Invictus Games and in the Caribbean on vacation or at movie premieres, and is very eager to sabotage an event like this with a big public pity party. You know, come to think of it, maybe they really don't want to go to this wedding. After all, they like to go to places where they can wear hidden mics to try to illegally record their friends and family and sue everyone after the fact over fake security concerns, like they did at the Platinum Jubilee. In my opinion, that's the real reason they weren't invited. The Grosvenors rightfully worry she will make up some atrocious lie about how they treated her and drag them and their guests through the mud as thanks for the the invite, and they're not going to give her the chance. I personally agree with Tom Bower that Prince William would not tell Hughie who to invite or not to invite to his wedding. And I think all the suggestions that Hugh excluded H&M to please William come from H&M. They take every opportunity to try to make Will and Kate look like villains. Will and Kate politely tolerated either Harry or the both of them at Philip's funeral, Platinum Jubilee, the Queen's funeral, and the coronation. Why wouldn't they do the same on any future occasion, particularly a friend's wedding? This wedding is supposed to be huge. It's supposed to be hundreds of people, maybe even 1,000 people. They could easily avoid each other in the crowd. Will and Hughie are not Cartman and Butters, and it makes H&M seem dumb and obvious when they try to frame things that way. I suppose it sounds slightly less dumb and obvious than when she claims she's not attending an event for fear of overshadowing the much more prominent, important, famous, and respectable person being honored. Remember when she imagined anyone would have cared at all whether or not she showed up to Prince Philip's funeral? Maybe even she realizes some level that she would never be able to outshine a newly minted billionaire duchess 10 years her junior. You know what I find so funny? The Westminster motto is Virtus non stemma, virtue not ancestry. There are plenty of ladies in the UK, but Hughie's not marrying one. He's marrying a nice middle-class girl who went to school with Princess Eugenie. If there is a single member of the British aristocracy with the power and perspective to give Meghan a break, it's Hughie, but he's not. And I think that says something. I think it says the door is closed on H&M in this generation. Hughie was really the baby of the group. Most everyone is engaged, married, déjà sont faits. I do say this generation rather than forever though, because the only person I feel bad for here is little Archie, cut off from his grandparents and godparents. Archie. He should be a cute little page boy at this wedding, and instead his parents aren't even invited. I hope Archie convinces Harry he really wants to follow in his footsteps and attend Eton and be a military officer, and leaves and just never comes back. That's my dream for him, that Charles and Camilla are still alive when he is a teenager, and one day he'll show up at the palace security kiosk with his luggage and his passport, telling them he's not talking to his abusive, drug-addled parents anymore, and he'd like a room and an introduction at a school. I suppose in less than a decade, Archie will be a preteen able to watch any video ever made about his parents on YouTube as well. Archie, if you're listening, there's only one rule when it comes to malignant narcissistic parents. When you know, you go. Let me know in the comments below what kind of novel shenanigans you think Madame might come up with between now and June 7th. Toodles! Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.